Welcome back everyone to the Naughty Dog Reviews. We're getting pretty close to the end now, with only 3 games left to talk about, including this one. I just want to say that I've had such a great time talking about these games. There's just such a consistency and quality with them. They've also slowly matured more and more with each new franchise, going from family-friendly titles like Crash Bandicoot and the Jak and Daxter franchise, to the more realistic gunplay of the Uncharted series, then finally to the dark and gritty world of The Last of Us. Nobody was exactly sure where the company would go after The Last of Us, but surprisingly they went back to the Uncharted series. I always just assumed they would leave it as a trilogy, but I'm so glad that they didn't because Uncharted 4 is arguably the best Uncharted game. Of course, being a huge fan of the original trilogy, I was hesitant to admit that for a while. Uncharted 2 was my favorite for such a long time that it was hard for me to let this new game just walk in and take my top spot. But that was back in 2016, and since then I've had years to think about this game and how it stacks up against the others. So, without further ado, let's get into this review of Uncharted 4: A Thief's End.
Probably too long and full of typos, but that's what editors are for, right? God, I'm starving.
The Uncharted trilogy never told the deepest stories. Don't get me wrong, there were some great adventures, but they were fairly basic, especially when compared to Naughty Dog's later work in The Last of Us. Uncharted 4, on the other hand, puts a much larger focus on building a compelling story with far more developed characters. The game starts with a scene that takes place about halfway through the game, similarly to the way Uncharted 2 opened. The scene isn't quite as intriguing as the cliffhanger opening of that game, but it still helps to make you interested to see how Nate got into yet another deadly situation. After that, we're shown some of Nate's childhood where he grew up in a boarding school. This mainly serves to introduce you to his brother Sam, who wasn't mentioned in any of the other games. This is the part that seems to conflict with the backstory shown in Uncharted 3, but Nate looks younger in this game's flashbacks, so I just see them as happening before he was taken in by Sully. This is followed by another flashback that seems to take place a few years before the first game. This shows us that Nate's brother Sam seemingly died during a prison escape, which is how the game justifies the fact that we haven't seen or heard from him before. They say that Nate didn't want to talk about him because the memories are too painful.
What a baby.
It's obvious that they didn't really plan on him having a brother until now, but to me this is a good enough reason to make him feel like he didn't just totally come out of nowhere. Once you're finally done with those flashbacks, you get to hop into the real action, and by that I mean you get to see Nate go to work. Oh, don't worry though, because as soon as you're done with that, you get to sit down and eat dinner while you talk about your day? Are you sure this is the right game? So yeah, this game starts off a little slower than the rest of the Uncharted games do. The slow opening hours are really my only negative with this game, and even though they're a little hard to get through, I feel that these parts were necessary for establishing the main plot of the game. Plus, I can't really hate it too much considering you literally get to play Crash Bandicoot as Nate and Elena to decide who has to do the dishes.
What? Is that it?
You asked for it. Oh.
You gotta be kidding me. I practically had it.
Anyways, now that all that's out of the way, here's where the story really starts. So after living a quiet life with Elena for years after the events of Uncharted 3, Nate is pulled back into the world of treasure hunting when he's visited by his brother Sam, who's alive as it turns out. He explains to Nate that the only way he was able to break out of prison was with the help of a man named Hector Alcazar. This left him owing a debt that he can only pay off if Nate helps him find Henry Avery's lost pirate colony. So, in typical Uncharted fashion, we proceed to search for this colony, while constantly followed by an army that's also looking for it. The basic story structure of racing towards the lost city against a lunatic and his army remains the same, but the characters and their dynamics are much stronger this time. This is shown pretty early on in the scene of Nate and Elena just eating dinner together. Their conversations are some of the most natural and well voice acted I've ever heard, and that goes for the rest of the characters and their interactions as well. The returning characters are all still the same people you know and love, but they have more depth to them now. The new dynamics between the heroes and even the villains make this story stand out among the rest of the Uncharted games. To add to that, the lost city you're looking for is much more grounded in reality. Sure, it may have lost some of that sense of exploring a magical place of wonder, but I'd argue that this was even better since it almost feels like this is something you could find in real life if you really looked for it. This game does a great job at keeping the fun and excitement of the rest of the series, while also keeping it more character driven and grounded in the real world. Ever since Uncharted 2, the gameplay in this series has seen little change. This game plays mostly the same, but with a few additions that make it feel better than ever. Nate now has a grappling hook that adds a lot more diversity to the climbing, puzzles, and even combat scenarios. Using this thing is a ton of fun, but it also helped to create some of the most jaw-dropping action sequences in the entire series. The most noteworthy additions, though, are the new stealth mechanics. Stealth was pretty much non-existent in the rest of the series, aside from a couple of specific moments that set up the enemies in the perfect position for you to sneak up on them. Uncharted 4 finally turned stealth into a proper option. There are things like tall grass to help you avoid detection, sense meters that let you immediately know when you've been spotted, and you can finally revert back to stealth if you go unseen for long enough. Some of the encounters can even be completely bypassed without killing a single enemy if you're sneaky enough. It's not exactly at the level of complexity found in The Last of Us, but it adds a lot more diversity to how you can approach each encounter in the game, which makes it easier to believe that one person could actually take out all of these people. This game continued the trend of making more open encounters, which was really necessary if they wanted to properly utilize the rope swing mechanics. When you're not busy ending countless human lives, you'll probably be exploring, which has also hugely improved since the original trilogy. All of the areas in this game are just more open in general, but there are 2 really large levels in this game that allow you to explore them in whatever order you want. One has Nate, Sam, and Sully driving a jeep through Madagascar looking for the 12 towers. There are hidden areas to explore, encounters to survive, and ropes to tie around trees. Okay, but seriously, look how awesome it is that you actually have to walk around the tree to secure the rope's hold on it. Naughty Dog, you exceptional bastards. The other open level takes place on a collection of islands and can also be explored in any order. The only slightly disappointing thing about these levels is that there's only 2 of them. The game's advertising sort of led us to believe that there were a lot more levels like this, but there are only these 2. Personally, I wasn't too upset since the 2 we have are so great, but it would have been nice to have at least 1 or 2 more.
Thanks, Captain Avery.
Video games these days are starting to look insanely good. Almost everywhere you look, you'll see one that nearly looks as realistic as the real world. What makes Naughty Dog stand out, however, are the little details that they carefully place into all of their work. Now that I've gone over the main things regarding gameplay and story, I'm going to simply spout out all of these little details that make this game so great to watch and play. When walking through crowds, Nate actually moves dynamically to fit through them. The sound design in this game makes it feel far more like you're actually gunning down hundreds of living, breathing people. When scaling a wall, your companions will climb over you instead of phasing through you. The reticle on Nate's gun turns orange to let you know that you've created yet another lifeless corpse. Nate climbs into the Jeep instead of using the door. Characters will squint when you shine a light in their face. Shooting these rocks can actually cause a rock slide. Cover gets destroyed by explosions and gunfire. There are so many little details like this that there's no way I can list them all here. Just know that Naughty Dog went out of their way to create a world that reacts to your actions.
Nathan Drake found the lost city in the middle of the Rub al-Khali desert.
Something I haven't touched on much for this game are its villains. Nadine Ross is the one who leads the army you fight throughout the game, but she isn't really evil like you'd think. She's working with a man named Rafe who is actually pretty evil on the other hand. His whole thing is that he's been pampered his whole life, so he actually wants to accomplish something on his own for once. He doesn't care what he has to do to get there, even if that includes killing anyone who stands in his way. Remind you of anyone? Anyways, at the end of the game you face off with Rafe in a sword fight, and personally it's my favorite boss encounter in the series. The mechanics are simple, but the scene is so dramatic and has enough going on to keep you on your toes, especially if you play on a harder difficulty. Rafe becomes an absolute madman when you fight him on Crushing, doing full-on spin attacks that make it incredibly hard to predict which side you have to block. Luckily there are checkpoints after every few hits you land on him, because otherwise this fight would have taken me forever to get through. Since this game is a lot newer than the original trilogy, I won't go into detail on the ending. I'll just say that this game has a nice little epilogue that was both heartwarming and extremely sad since it's the end of this series. And you get to play Crash Bandicoot again, and I think it works really well to use as a callback to the company's roots before sending off this series.
For a while it felt like, if we weren't taking turns going to...
The Uncharted series will always hold a special place in my memories of video games I played as a younger kid. Uncharted 4 may have had a slow start, but to me, the improved emphasis on characters and the more dynamic gameplay make it all around the best Uncharted game. I understand that a lot of people still prefer 2, and I can completely understand that, but for me, this is the peak of Uncharted. I give Uncharted 4 a 9.5 out of 10. Wait a minute, is that a half score? But you've never done that before. Well, there's a first time for everything, so deal with it. Oh wait, I forgot to talk about the multiplayer. It's pretty fun actually.